ये जो है the world of imagination and the concept of space in the Persian literature. ये 𝗁 𝗁𝗲 Islamic Art and Spirituality में छपा है. It's basically one of his essays. If you just Google it, you'll find it. And I'll read it. But what will be more fun is that along the way, let's ask some questions because there are complex ideas in this. और अच्छा यही होगा कि जो भी पूछना है पूछो ताकि वो सबके लिए फायदा होता है. जो नहीं भी पूछते उनका भी फायदा होता है. So it is unfortunate that the field of Persian art and particularly Islamic art of Persia has not been studied to any appreciable extent with a view to understanding its symbolic and metaphysical significance. So the key words यहाँ पे symbolic and metaphysical. The penetration and devotion we observe in studies of the symbolism of Indian, Chinese, Japanese art by men such as 𝗁𝗏 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 and most recently Roland are for the most part lacking in the case of the art of Islamic Persia. And the few studies in depth of Islamic art, especially those by 𝗁 𝗁𝗲 and by 𝗁𝗏 and a few others, stand out as exceptions in this field. तो ये जो academic world में जो लोग इसमें काम कर रहे हैं, उनके नाम आपको मिल गए हैं. तो अगर आप चाहो तो you can always Google them and find out more essays on Islamic art and written by these people. Today, however, it is becoming generally accepted, even in academic circles, that the art of a traditional civilization expounds through the language of symbolism the metaphysical and spiritual truths dominant in that civilization, and that the significance of this art cannot be exhausted through purely historical or external types of analysis of form, which remain indifferent to the meaning conveyed by these forms. ये बात यहाँ तक वाज़े? तो सायरा आपके साथ तो हमने लैंग्वेज ऑफ सिंबलिज्म और मेटाफिजिकल स्पिरिचुअल ट्रूथ्स के ऊपर काफी डिस्कशंस की हैं. एंड सामिया, डू यू नीड एनी फर्दर?
जी सर.
आज मेरा भी कोई सवाल नहीं है अभी तक.
सामिया, आपने कुछ पूछना है स्टेज पे? बात वाज़े
जी. मतलब मेटाफिजिकल और सिंबलिज्म के ऊपर ज्यादा ये स्ट्रेस देती है ना, ये कहना चाह रहे हैं?
यही कह रही हूँ. और आप अगर आपने बहुत से और इस्लामिक आर्ट को स्टडी किया होगा तो उनका भी यही, दिस इज द क्रक्स ऑफ इट. दिस ट्रूथ होल्ड्स एज मच ट्रू इन द केस ऑफ
क्लियर.
जी बोलो. as in that of any other traditional civilization. Yet how many of the most essential features of this art have remained a closed book, and attempts have been made to explain them away in terms of historical influences rather than the light of the inner meaning which they seek to reveal. In this field, we wish to delve briefly into the aspect of this hitherto relatively unexplored field and treat the question of space, especially as it pertains to the Persian miniature. The Cartesian surgery of reality left European science and philosophy, and through them the general view of the Western men, with but two alternative domains: the world of the mind and the world of extension or space, which became identified exclusively with the material world. When we speak of space today, whether it be the linear space of Newtonian physics or the curved space of relativity, we are exclusively concerned with the spatio-temporal domain of reality, which we identify with reality as such. We can hardly conceive of a non-physical space, which is not the creation of man's whims and fantasies, but possesses an ontological reality of its own. Yet it is precisely with such a space that sacred art, and more particularly the Persian art with which we are now concerned, deals. To conceive of space which is more than physical, and which sacred art seeks to make felt through its technique and symbolism, there must exist a discontinuity with the physical space in which man lives in this profane life. As long as there is continuity between profane space, there is a lag. Lives in this profane life. As long as there is a continuity with profane space, there is a lag of the transcending dimension, which leads beyond physical space and the physical world. In the sacred art of Islam par excellence, namely the mosque, space is not meant to be supernatural, as opposed to natural. Rather, it is a space which recreates the peace and harmony of virgin nature by dissolving the tensions and disequilibria of the mundane world. But by this very fact, it is in its own way a differentiated and qualitative space which places man in the presence of the eternal by removing the tensions and stresses that characterize man's terrestrial and temporal life. अब आपका जो मॉस्क का आर्किटेक्चर है, तैमूर सिटिंग है, वो स्क्वायर के अंदर डिजाइन होता है. इज इट प्राइमरी फॉर्म, और स्क्वायर जो है वो डिसइक्विलिब्रिया को स्टेबलाइज करती है. तो जब आप किसी चीज को, when you enter a square space, which is a perfect square, you will find as though you entered into something which is very still. There is a certain kind of balancing of all the external chaotic tension of the world, and you move into this space which is very calming, very still. And if you ever have the opportunity next time to enter a mosque, don't just think of it because it's a place where people pray, but also look at its proportions and the kind of energetic feeling that you experience when you enter that space. As for the Persian miniature, it is also based on the heterogeneous division of two-dimensional space in the world. Two-dimensional meaning Kawas is two-dimensional. For only in this way can each horizon of the two-dimensional surface come to symbolize a state of being as well as a degree of consciousness. Now, ये जो term है ना, each horizon. Horizon का मतलब क्या है? Vanishing points, straight lines, lines between 2 points. So when you have two lines between two points, they are a line of horizon. और इस line of horizon को उन्होंने degree of consciousness के साथ link किया. So there is this layering, so that each degree of consciousness is something that you can experience other than this world, other than the material consciousness. And even in those miniatures where there is an integration of space and creation of a homogeneous space, this whole space is clearly distinguished by its non-three-dimensional character from the natural space around it. Now, if we have any images, we could show them. It is therefore itself a recapitulation of the space of another world and concerns another mode of consciousness. The laws of perspective followed in the Persian miniature before influences of the Renaissance art came along with internal factors brought about its decay is one based on natural perspective. The Perspectiva Naturalis, whose geometric laws were developed by Euclid and later by Muslim geometrists and opticians such as 𝗔𝗓 𝗏 and 𝗁 The miniature remained faithful to the law of the science and in conformity with the realism of the Islamic view and did not betray the two-dimensional nature of the surface by making it appear as three-dimensional, as was to happen through the application of the rules of artificial perspective. Saira, do you have an image of your Conference of the Birds which you could share on the screen?
Yes, I will. Just give me 2 minutes.
Okay, now we have an image here from Miniaturist, the Conference of the Birds by 𝗪𝗏 𝗫𝗏. And you see here that all the forms are highly designed. They are flat. Even though the birds are rendered in a very 3D kind of way, they are not. Sarah, can you enlarge it slightly? I can. That's perfect. Now, if you look at everything, you see a stream flowing from the foot of the tree and it's flat. You see the way the mountains are drawn. They are very highly stylized. They're not drawn in a 3D way. They're just drawn flat and then colored in such a way that they make you feel like they're moving. And they almost feel like coral rather than like as though it's rock. And each of the birds is placed next to each other without any context of size. So this aspect of the miniature, where it's treated almost in design format, and underlying all this proportionality is your geometry. So if I have to look at, Sarah, zoom out again. If you look at the image as a whole, it's designed on the under root 2 concept. Now if I go back to the text, I have to go back to the screenshot. Yes. Shall I share this now? Okay, so now I'm coming back to where we were. Artificial perspective. Artificial perspective का मतलब है कि it is in 2D. It's flat. It's not in 3D. There are no vanishing points. There's no illusion of the third dimension on the two-dimensional surface of the page, which is also flat. So during the European year Renaissance, by conforming strictly to the non-homogeneous or heterogeneous and qualitative perception of space, the Persian miniature succeeds in transforming the plane surface of the miniature to a canvas depicting grades of reality, and was able to guide man from the horizon of material existence and profane and mundane consciousness to a higher state of being and consciousness, an intermediate world with its own space, own time, movement, color, form, where events occur in a real but not necessarily physical manner. The world which the Muslim philosophers of Persia have called the imagining world, or the mundus imaginis, or the 𝗓𝗏. Before turning to analyze the features of this world that is so unknown to our modern topography of what we consider to be real, we must pause to answer an objection that is found to be bound to be made to a spiritual and symbolic interpretation of the Persian religion. It will be said that the mosque architecture and Quranic calligraphy are sacred arts connected directly with the religious life, but the Persian miniature is a courtly art that flourished in the worldly environment of Persian court life and made use of romantic and epic themes having no religious significance. To answer this question, or this objection, it must be recalled that in a traditional civilization, especially one like Islam, where religion dominates over all spheres of life, no aspect of human activity is left outside the authority of the spiritual principles, and least of all that which deals with what would correspond to temporal authority in Western parlance. In terms of Western language, it could be said that purely sacred art in Islam, such as mosque architecture, calligraphy, correspond to the sacerdotal initiation and to the greater mysteries, while miniature and the other courtly arts to knightly and royal initiation and the lesser mysteries. More specifically in Persia, through the extension of the organization of Sufi orders, many functions connected with chivalry were directly integrated into Sufism, and many of the courtly arts, such as miniature painting and music, were cultivated by the Sufis. There are too many examples in the Safed or even Qajar periods to need further elucidation here. The themes chosen for miniature bear out this point. For the most part, they are either epic scenes depicting battles of ancient Persian heroes, as recorded mostly in the Shahnama, or tales of moral and spiritual significance, drawn from such works as the 𝗓𝗏 or the writings of Nizami and Sa'di. In the first case, the heroic scene is transposed above history to be trans-historical, where it requires also a Gnostic, 𝗔𝗵, and mystical significance in the same way that 𝗁𝗲 was to give a Gnostic interpretation to the ancient epics of Iran in its theosophical and mystical narratives. In the second case also, the artistic treatment and of the themes takes place in a world above ordinary temporality, where it gains a non-temporal and permanent significance. So if it was drawn in 3D, the whole focus of the viewer becomes the material plane. But because it's deliberately drawn in the 2D, it is able to convey what this last sentence is said. In this second case, the artistic treatment of the themes takes place in a world above ordinary temporality. Because it's in 2D, because it's a symbol, because it's highly designed, it gains a non-temporal and permanent significance. Even the plants and the animals that are drawn are not simply those of physical nature, but of prime ordinary nature, of the paradisical environment, which remains actualized even now in the 𝗷𝗵𝗀𝗿 or 𝗷𝗵𝗀𝗃. So in the previous painting, we saw birds. So those pictures are not depicting the birds, but the qualitative traits within the birds. So in that process, they are trying to convey through that symbol something other than just the particular typology of the bird that you see. In all these cases, the majority of Persian pictures depict not a profane world, but the intermediary world, which stands above the physical and which is the gateway to all higher states of being. Like the lesser mysteries, which prepare the adept for entrance into the abode of the greater mysteries, the miniature, along with the similar so-called courtly arts, is a traditional art of the intermediate world, and by virtue of this character has for its subject what we call earthly paradise, whose joys and beauties it seeks to recreate. So when you look at the miniature painting, the earthly paradise में जो खूबसूरती जो paradise से तशबीहात आपको कुरान में मिलती हैं, शजर हैं, फल हैं, बागात हैं, नहरें हैं, पहाड़ हैं, ये सब चीजें आपको मिनिएचर की वोकैबुलरी में नजर आएंगी. But they do not represent a 3D world. They represent the 2D world. And are used more as symbols with layers of nuanced meanings. We must now clear the meaning and ontological status of this world of imagination, the 𝗷𝗵𝗀𝗃, which has its correspondence in other traditional cosmologies, including those of ancient Persia. The multiple states of being can be summarized in 5 principal states, which the Sufis call the 5 divine presences, the Hazrat al-Ilahiyya, and which Islamic philosophers from 𝗁𝗲 onwards have accepted fully as a ground pattern and plan of reality. Though they have used other terminology to describe it, and these worlds or presences include the physical world, 𝗏, the intermediate world, 𝗁𝗏ut. So the miniature image that you saw was a 𝗁𝗏uti image, and the archangelic world, 𝗁𝗏ut, the world with the divine names and qualities, 𝗁𝗏ut, and the divine essence or 𝗪𝗏 itself, 𝗁, which is also called 𝗁𝗏ut. The 𝗪𝗏ut and the states beyond it are above forms and formal manifestation, and whereas the 𝗁𝗏ut, which corresponds to the world of imagination, 𝗷𝗵𝗀𝗃𝗏𝗏, possesses form but not matter in the ordinary peripatetic sense. That is why, in fact, this world is also called the world of hanging forms, 𝗁𝗏𝗪. The later Persian philosophers like Mirza Sadra have devoted many pages to its description and proof of its existence. But from another point of view, this world possesses its own matter, which is 𝗔𝗴𝗏, which in fact is the body of resurrection. For in this world is located both paradise in its formal aspect and the infernal. This world possesses, likewise, its own space, time, movement, its own bodies, shapes, and colors. So look, when we look at the mountains, the trees, the streams, they can be identifiable with the ones that we see in 3D, but they're not exactly those. In its negative aspect, this world is the cosmic labyrinth of veils that separate man from the divine. but in its positive aspect, it is the state of paradise wherein are contained the original forms, colors, smells, and tastes of all that gives joy to man upon the earth. The space of the Persian miniature is a recapitulation of the space, and its forms and colors are a replica of this world. The colors, especially the gold and the lapis, are not just subjective whims of the imagination of the artist. Rather, they are the fruit of vision of an objective reality based on a particular one plane to another, moving always between two-dimensional and three-dimensional, but it never falls into the three-dimensional pure and simple. If it were to do so, it would cease to be a depiction of a Malakoot and would become simply a replica of a myth. So when you look at 3D naturalistic painting, you are seeing replicas of the moon. That is not the purpose of work that is done with a spiritual dimension involved in it. And would always remain in the 2D, because then it is more potent as a symbol and has layers of meanings. Otherwise, it will just become a mountain or just a stream, and that is not the purpose of what this whole activity is. By remaining on another plane, yet possessing a life and movement of its own, the miniature is able to give a contemplative aspect and to create an aspect of joy, so characteristic of the Persian spirit, which an echo of the joy of paradise. Like the Persian rug, the genuine Persian garden, the miniature serves as a reminder of a reality which transcends the mundane surroundings of human life. The space of the miniature is the space of the imaginal world, with the forms of nature, the trees, the flowers, and the birds, as well as the events within the human soul have their origin. This world itself is, in fact, world beyond the external world and within the soul of man. It is a world that is often depicted and described in Persian Sufi poetry, and is in these verses of the Masnavi, where Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi says, "In the orchard, a certain Sufi laid his face in Sufi fashion upon his knee for the sake of revelation. Then he sank deep into himself. An impertinent fellow was annoyed by his semblance of slumber. 'Why,' said he, 'dost thou sleep? Nay, look at the rivers, behold these trees, the marks of divine mercy, and the green plants. Hearken to the sound of God, for hath he said, Look ye, turn thy face towards these marks of divine mercy.' He replied, 'O man of vanity, its marks are within the heart. That which is without is only the marks of the marks. The real orchards and verdure are in the very essence of the soul. The reflection thereof upon that which is without is the reflection in running water. In the water, there is only the phantom reflected image of the orchard, which quivers on account of the subtle quality of the water. The real orchards and fruits are within the heart. The reflection of their beauty is falling upon this water and earth, the external world. If it were not the reflection of a delectable cypress, then God would not have followed his role of deception. The function of the genuine Persian miniature, as all sacred and traditional art, is to reflect through symbolism something of that delectable garden in the world, which without this reflection will be beyond deception. Samia, Saira, anything you want to add?
मैम जो इसमें ऑब्जेक्शन लगाई थी कि ये ज्यादातर कोर्ट की थी आर्ट, तो अगर हम देखें तो उसकी जैसे इवन अभी भी देखें तो थोड़ी सी लग्जरी इसके अंदर मसलन है मिनिएचर में, जैसे गोल्ड और जो सिल्वर का इस्तेमाल, और मसलन इवन बड़ी रेयर भी थी, जाहिर है बहुत कम आर्टिस्ट इसको करते रहे हैं और अभी तक भी करते रहे हैं, लेकिन ये जरा एक हाई क्लास ही की आर्ट नहीं समझी जाती, इसके बारे में थोड़ा सा।
आपकी बिल्कुल उस पर्सपेक्टिव से बात दुरुस्त है, बट ये भी याद रखो कि ये किताब का हिस्सा है, राइट? एंड द बुक्स वर done under the patronage of rulers, and ateliers were where the patron was able to provide the financial means for these books to be made. And books, the main purpose was to document knowledge. and they would become part of libraries. And in that era, to be able to read and write was not something that mainstream mankind had access to. So in that case, those societies where you had these books being made, where these books were available, was always going to be to the intelligentsia who could read that. So from that perspective, what you're saying is right, but it does not take away from the fact that the art itself was an interpretation of the text. So whatever the text was, it was visualized into an image. And to be able to visualize very, very subtle texts like mystic poetry, for instance, you had to understand and create almost a vocabulary which would have the same depth as the word had. It was a सूरत है, उसके साथ एक मायने का element, और उस मायने के अंदर the ability to convey so much just through a painted image. And then, as this happens in all of traditional art, there is also the aspect where the process, in fact, enriches the artist. It's not the product that we're talking about, but the process which governs the production of the product, which is the 𝗁𝗍 𝗧 and the development of your character that takes place in that system through which such a painting is made. And maybe Saira can share some insights because she is in the process of copying one of these paintings, and it's another piece by one of the masters. And I think that when you sit down to make one of these paintings, you begin to realize what goes into it. So all of these arts, whether it was architecture or it was, the decorative elements upon architecture, whether it was music, because music in words is साथ ही चल रही है ना. Or whether it's the image being used as the medium to convey something. It was just a language. It was a language that evolved with a very strong relationship to text and became part of the book. And all of these skills, when a large number of people were brought together, they were basically like in the company of scholars, where if they had to translate a text into image, they had to understand that text. And that whole act of learning and the act of making was refining that. It's the alchemy of the process.
Thank you. एक मैम जो तज़हीब हमने आर्ट देखा था उसमें और मिनिएचर में, यानी ये एक ही चीज है, वो ज्यादा सिंबॉलिक पैटर्न्स की हम देख रहे थे.
All part of the arts of the book. एक किताब को बनाने के लिए आपको बहुत सारे लोगों को इकट्ठा करना पड़ता था. खतात भी होते थे, तज़हीब करने वाले भी होते थे, मुसव्विर मिनिएचर बनाने वाले भी होते थे, और उससे रिलेटेड जिल्द डिजाइन करने वाले भी होते थे, और फिर ऑल द एक्चुअल स्टफ व्हिच मींस के कागज भी बनाना होता था, रंग भी तैयार करने होते थे, स्याही भी बननी होती थी, और ब्रशेस भी, टूल्स भी बनने होते थे. इट वाज अ फुल अटेलियर वर्कशॉप, एंड one manuscript could take sometimes decades to complete, and the project would involve sometimes something like 100 people. So they would be employed in the process, and they would evolve within the process and grow. So ये एक system था, like अगर आपका शौक है towards art, तो you could go and join an atelier of this sort. पर आपका कोई interest किसी और direction में था, तो all the guilds which existed in the Islamic world were not just designed from a very purely functional perspective. They were designed from the perspective that they would help the individual become the best form of themselves. And all of their activity would be meaningful activity. जो उसको पढ़ेगा या उसकी तस्वीर को देखेगा वो भी कुछ हासिल कर रहा है, और जो उस टेक्स्ट को ट्रांसलेट करके एक तस्वीर की शक्ल ढाल रहा है वो भी कुछ हासिल करेगा, और उस एक्चुअल एक्टिविटी में से भी कुछ हासिल करेगा, other than the money aspect of it. And these artists would not even sign their pictures themselves. We know them by name later, more through art historians. There's hardly ever a signature which the artist put his name. Sometimes the khatat are mentioned in the manuscript, but rarely the artists, rarely the ones who did the tasneem. And all of these skills are underwritten by geometry. The principles of design to go in. So the theological, philosophical, principles, they're all the same. And they're almost crystallized in geometric design. And usse nikale jate hain. All of this, even the miniature is designed with geometry underlying it. It's when you understand the basic geometry, you know how to manipulate all the forms and how everything can emerge from geometry. Any other questions? Islamic art basically purposeful activity. Uske andar, so the actual alchemy is in doing it. जो एक तस्वीर बनाने बैठेगा ना उसको समझ आएगी what it takes to make one.
मैम मेरा एक क्वेश्चन है, जो यहाँ स्टार्ट में एक बात हुई थी होमोजेनियस एंड हेटेरोजेनियस स्पेस में, उसको डिवाइड कैसे करते हैं, आप उसको थोड़ा सा एक्सप्लेन कर देंगे?
सायरा ऊंचा बोलो, तुम्हारा साउंड हमेशा I can't make out the question.
I think first page पे, second page पे homogeneous and heterogeneous space की कोई बात हो रही थी.
But can you look up heterogeneous? That will explain. Just give me the dictionary on heterogeneous.
Sentence पढ़ लेना फिर समझ
हाँ, ये मैं सिर्फ उसका मीनिंग उससे डिलिबरेटली निकलवा रही हूँ, उसको खुद ही समझ आ जाएगी.
तो मुझे उससे थोड़ा सा अंडरस्टैंड कर पा रही हूँ मैं, वो ये कि जब आप प्रोफेन आर्ट करते हैं तो आप एक ही स्पेस को डिपिक्ट कर रहे हैं, लेकिन इसमें जब आप वो बॉर्डर्स वगैरह यूज करते हैं तो आप डिफरेंट रेल्म्स में जा रहे होते हैं. इससे मुराद यही है, कुछ डिफरेंट बात है.
Conforming strictly to the non-homogeneous or heterogeneous, ठीक है, non-homogeneous and qualitative conception of space. कि स्पेस जो हमारे इस्लामिक वर्ल्ड व्यू में सिर्फ ये नहीं है जो आपकी कार्टेशियन स्पेस है. हमारी स्पेस जो है उसके अंदर हमने हेटेरोजेनियस जो एलिमेंट है ना, कि इट्स डिवाइडेड, इट्स नॉट ऑल वन. दिस रियलिटी इज नॉट द ओनली रियलिटी. और उसके अंदर वो जो 5 प्रिंसिपल प्रेजेंसेस की जो बात है ना, द एंड ऑफ दिस, आई थिंक इट्स फर्दर डाउन ऑन दिस, वो है जो हेटेरोजेनियस की उसकी डिविजन्स है. मीनिंग नीचे आपका मुल्क है, उसके ऊपर मलाकुत है व्हिच इज योर इमेजिनरी realm ऑफ कॉन्शियसनेस, फिर जबरूत है और फिर लाहूत और हाहूत है. तो इसमें जो 5 की डिवीजन दी हुई है ना, वो उससे मतलब है हेटेरोजेनियस.
मतलब मल्टीपल.
होमोजेनियस मतलब एक, एवरीथिंग इज ऑल इंट्वाइंड. और इसमें ये कि सेपरेटेड.
जैसे आपके सिर्फ फिजिकल तो होमोजेनियस होती, मगर इट इज मल्टीपल.
It is multiple, and then there is layers. Now there are veils within our intellect, within our consciousness that does not allow us to perceive all of this while we are part of the physical realm. But these arts, these kind of practices help you to develop subtle senses. And those are inward focused senses which allow you to actually penetrate to these other realms of consciousness. तो जब तक आपका सारा senses जो है, आपकी सारी attention जो है वो diverted to the physical world रहेगी ना, तो you will miss out on so much that you just simply cannot see, hear, taste or touch.
और in a sense उसमें भी 3-dimensional perspective की नफी की जाती है मिनिएचर पेंटिंग में. उसका भी बड़ा असर होता है आपके जहन को स्पेस से ऊपर ले जाने. इसलिए सारे कार्ट में आप देखेंगे ज्यादा जो है वो एक तरह से एब्स्ट्रैक्ट कर देते हैं सरफेसेस को भी, यानी कि सरफेसेस भी जैसे डिसॉल्व हो जाती है. तो 2 डायमेंशनैलिटी को जब आगे करते हैं तो आप जैसे कि 3 डायमेंशन से दूर हो जाए. ये भी है इसमें. उसका जो पावर है जो आप कह रहे हैं ना,
और दूसरी तरफ देखो तो you need, when you look at bacteria, you cannot see them with the naked eye, but they are little worlds in themselves, and you can see them through a certain lens like a microscope. Microscope के through आप उसको देख सकते हैं. तो ये वो जो आपको मिनिएचर के टूल्स मिल रहे हैं, जो सिंबल्स मिल रहे हैं, they almost act like those microscopes, and they show you something that you don't immediately perceive by looking at it, but your mind has the capability to go beyond that physical form at the surface. And a symbol जो है वो एक archetype तक आपको लेके जाती है, उसकी source तक लेके जाती है, but उसके अंदर बहुत सारे layers हैं. So पहली जो चीज है, we have to break through this thought process which makes us trapped that this is the only reality, the homogeneous reality of this earthly, worldly realm of consciousness. You start to realize there is more than what you can see and perceive, then you will understand all these terms that are used in traditional art, what they mean, and how the grammar in those forms is actually a reference for all of this experience, which is a sensory experience.
तो फाइजा से यही आप जो बात कर रहे हो, यही शायद कहना चाह रहा हूँ कि collapsing the third dimension is a tool for making you see your.
Yes.
ठीक है.
और वो collapsing the tool जो है उस symbol के अंदर वो potency है.
Symbols तो फिर उसके अंदर नेस्ट है ना, वो तो additional है. But just the basic format of the miniature is maybe.
Saira, just pull back that image. वो जो जिद्वल और हाशिया और बॉर्डर है ना, वो इन सारी realms of consciousness को डिपिक्ट करती है. That's the basic grammar. I think Samia would benefit from seeing that image.
It's
the over screen. She had. Maybe new share की पास हाँ इसमें था फिर डाउनलोड I changed the screen share.
डाउनलोड कर लिया
नहीं she shared it.
जब तक आप
नहीं उसको करने तो उसके पास है. she's been working on that image. It will be easier because she has a very good project like that. उसको जब बड़ा करते हैं तो अच्छा. But because we looked at it earlier, so it's been part of our discussion. So I just wanted to bring that back. It'll be easier for somebody who sees that image again. Saira, she's gone somewhere.
मैंने शेयर की थी, आप विजिबल नहीं है?
नहीं फिर से करोगी?
उन्होंने की थी ना, ये उन्होंने भेज दिया.
इसको खोलो.
यस मैम, मैंने आपको लिंक भेज दिया.
राइट हैंड में
अब इसको लिंक को
क्लिक
खोलो.
करें बस. अब वो पहले अपने इस पे जाएगा, जूम पे जाके स्क्रीन शेयर कर लें.
हाँ
चलो
ये मैंने किया क्या? हाँ
ये ठीक है. अब जूम पे भी जाए ना, स्क्रीन भी शेयर कर.
जूम पे जाए और
राइट वाला काला वाला ये ऊपर
ये
जी
इसको
कहीं भी क्लिक करेंगे बड़ा है. अब आप शेयर स्क्रीन कर. स्क्रीन कर ले तो सामने उसके सबसे पहले ऑप्शन है ऊपर राइट पर. इससे ऊपर ये काला लिखा है स्क्रीन. अब शेयर का बटन दबा दें राइट हैंड.
हाँ okay here. So what Taimur was talking about कि miniature की formatting जो है, you see there is an inner rectangle and then you see a hashiya and there is a very specific treatment of the Hashya. And then there are areas where elements from the inner rectangle are breaking out and into the Hashya itself. This realm, इसको हम कहते हैं आलम मलाकूत, और इसको हम कहते हैं the realms beyond it, जिसमें आपकी जबरूत, लाहूत और हाहूत है. और ये जो 3 realms हैं, इसमें formlessness है, इसमें forms हैं, which are similar to the forms of the material plane of consciousness that we are familiar with. But ये forms 2D में हैं. So these are mountains, but they don't have the 3D element of mountains. These are streams flowing, but the stream is flat. These are birds, but they don't represent birds, they represent souls. And within typologies of birds, they represent the traits within those souls. So the storyline of it is built into this whole construct that जहाँ आप हैं वो मुल्क है और जहाँ आपकी तवज्जो है वो मलाकुत है.
दरख्त पे आपने बोल दिया.
दरख्त पे भी बोलने लगी हूँ फिर से. दरख्त जो है, it is sometimes taken as a symbol for the intellect, which given the right spirit be intellect be universal. Spirit and the intellect are the same, yes. And then the stream is the knowledge that feeds the intellect, which enables the seed to become the tree and then break the boundaries of consciousness. So the tree has the ability to transcend from the world to the imaginal world, to the world of divine consciousness itself. जिसको लाहूत और हाहूत कहते हैं. और इधर जो इसको गोल्ड लीफ के साथ ट्रीट किया है, ये नूर है, ये लाइट है, ये एनर्जी है. So इसको खास तौर पे इस तरह एक हल्का सा जैसे कि एटॉमिक लेवल पे उसको फॉर्मलेसनेस में डिपिक्ट किया. और इधर आपको जो ये जो गोल्ड नजर आ रहा है, ये भी लाइट है, ये भी लाइट है, नॉलेज है, जो पूरी क्रिएशन, पूरी कॉन्शियसनेस को अंडरराइट कर रही है. देयर इज नो इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्शियसनेस. और जो पहाड़ है वो कुरानिक रेफरेंस से अगर मैं लूं तो दे आर द पेग्स व्हिच स्टेबलाइज द वर्ल्ड. और दूसरी तरह इनको तशबीह दी जा सकती है कि ये विलायत का मकाम है. दे आर मैजेस्टिक, दे आर टावरिंग, दे आर टचिंग द क्लाउड्स, दे आर स्टिल, दे आर अनमूविंग. और फिर इसके अंदर जो पूरी कहानी है, इट्स अबाउट द स्पिरिचुअल गाइड, द ह्वोपिc which is in the tree, and it is having a conference with all the different types of souls in the world and is trying to inspire them to go beyond themselves, to be able to access the other world. So how can you translate a story with so many layers without using those forms as symbols and without creating these kind of juxtapositions in design where to be bound to draw in 3D would be so limiting for the story.
टेक्स्ट भी है.
हाँ, टेक्स्ट भी है, और टेक्स्ट तो बहुत ज्यादा है. तस्वीर is supposed to encompass so much more text. तो ये देखें, ये this is a hunter, or a hunter represents a seeker of truth. So he is an onlooker to the story. So this is a story being told to man, and man is present in this form as a seeker of the truth, listening to this tale. And then you have these goats, which represent intuition. So mountain goats जो हैं वो symbolize intuition, शऊर को करते हैं. तो शऊर जो है वो आपके पास जब होगा तो फिर ये सारा जो आपको ये कहानी का जो सारा निचोड़ है वो समझ आएगा. So first you have to understand this language. You have to learn to decode the symbols to be able to understand what the text says. Or conversely, if you read the text and then look at the image, you get a much better understanding of what the image is saying. तो ये वही सूरत और मायने की खेल है. Does that help, Samya?
जी, अब बहुत अच्छी क्लियर हो गए कॉन्सेप्ट सारे. बड़ा खूबसूरत है. ये जस्ट लाइक ये वही स्टोरी है जो मेरे ख्याल में हमने पढ़ी थी, जो मुख्तलिफ लोगों ने मुख्तलिफ तरीके से बयान की है. सहरवर्दी की भी थी ये वाली स्टोरी, जो हम मुख्तलिफ रेलम में जाते थे, पीछे हंटर लगा हुआ है, सेम जो थी. बड़ा बहुत अच्छा लगा, इस तरह ज्यादा क्लियर हो गया. थैंक यू मैम.
मैम इसमें कोई सेंटर का कोई सिग्निफिकेंस होती है मिनिएचर में, जैसे बाकी इस्लामिक आर्ट्स में हम देखते हैं, जैसे ज्योमेट्री में सेंटर की बहुत ज्यादा सिग्निफिकेंस होती है, तो मिनिएचर में उसको किस तरह से डिफाइन करते हैं?
Center in miniature would be like it is in geometry. You know, there are multiple points from which you could find a center. जब आप geometry में design करते हैं तो एक तो आपका center होता है, फिर multiple units of one होते हैं, वो जब tessellate करता है design.
Yes, makes sense.
That's the beauty of most of these paintings. इनके पीछे इनका जो underlying structure है वो geometric है. और वही बात है जो हमने बहुत दफा क्लास में डिस्कस की है कि वो जो सेंटर पॉइंट है फ्रॉम व्हिच एवरीथिंग इमर्जेस, द पॉइंट इज वेयर इट डजंट ऑक्यूपाई स्पेस एंड व्हाट डज इट, वेयर इज इट इमर्जिंग फ्रॉम. So when that point becomes a moving point and it becomes a line, it is manifesting itself.
वो अगर हम उनसे इतना दिखा देना वो जो
No, I've done that drawing with them. They've seen that. Samia, just imagine करें कि आपके पास एक सर्कल है और सर्कल का जो सेंटर है वो इनविजिबल है, लेकिन उस सेंटर से जब आप एक ड्रॉप करते हैं स्ट्रेट लाइन which is the radii and it goes and touches the circumference, it is manifesting another point. So it becomes a pathway between 2 points. That line is the first manifestation from the invisible into the visible. और फिर जब वो कर्व फॉर्म में सर्कमफ्रेंस बनती है तो वो आके वहीं खड़ी होती है जहां से वो शुरू हुई थी. एंड लाइन की ये दो शक्लें, सीधी और कर्व, और सारी फॉर्म्स इसी में से निकलती है, और ज्योमेट्री की भी सारी फॉर्म्स इसी में से निकलती है. और इनसाइड
मैम वो प्रैक्टिस किया था सर, करने करवाया था.
मैम मैंने ये ज्योमेट्रिक एनालिसिस इसका किया था, मैं वो शेयर करी थी समिया के लिए.
If you understand all the basic principles now, you can understand anything you look at. You basically simply need a circle. ये इसने किया था. She was trying to figure out how this design has evolved. तो उसका जो अगर आप देखें, जब आप शुरू करते हैं ना किसी स्पेस को आइडेंटिफाई करने या डिटरमिन करने के लिए, तो आपको एक मेजरमेंट चाहिए, वन लेंथ, व्हिच कुड बी एनी लेंथ, बिकॉज पहली जो फॉर्म आपको मिलती है वो स्क्वायर है. जब आप स्क्वायर का डायगोनल लेते हैं और उससे आप अपना एक्सटेंशन लगाते हैं, आप जिस तरह इसने बनाई है, तो आपको रेक्टेंगल एक पॉइंट आता है जहाँ पे एट द टॉप ऑफ द पेज इट कट्स द स्ट्रेट लाइन व्हिच इज बीइंग एक्सटेंडेड अपवर्ड्स फ्रॉम द स्क्वायर, राइट और लेफ्ट. इसका जो है ये नजर आ रहा है ऑन द राइट, और ये आपके पास एक ज्योमेट्रिकली प्रोपोर्शन रेक्टेंगुलर स्पेस है जो √2 के साथ चलती है या फिर √3 के साथ चलती है. ये 2 की है. तो जब आप ये देखेंगे तो आपको नजर आएगा कि ये ज्योमेट्रिक प्रोपोर्शनैलिटी के ऊपर डिस्क्राइब ये स्पेस. और फिर इस स्क्वायर के अंदर अगर आप देखें तो द डायगोनल एलिमेंट इज द स्ट्रीम, और फिर जो ऊपर का कर्व है उसमें आप देखें कि दरख्त को कैसे प्लेस किया है, और फिर उसने नीचे जो है सारी बर्ड्स को जो स्क्वायर के दोनों डायगोनल्स निकाल के सेंटर निकाला है, उसके साथ वो देखें कि बाकी सारी बर्ड्स की प्लेसमेंट कैसे है. So this is how basically you use geometry and geometric proportionality to design a 3D or 2D picture like this. तो ये स्पेस है जिसको ये सब डिवाइड कर रही है बेस्ड ऑन ज्योमेट्रिक रूल्स. उसने कह रहे कि ये शरीयत है जिसके अंदर इस स्पेस को उसने कंफाइन किया हुआ है और उस शरीयत के रूल्स के ऊपर फिर वो बाकी डिजाइन को इम्प्लीमेंट कर रही है, जिसको आप तरीके कह रहे हैं।
और इन से जो ज्योमेट्री है ना ये ट्रांसेंडेंट का सिंबल है।
और इसके अंदर वो एक हिडन पोटेंशियल है जिसको आप जिस अंदाज में करना चाहें आप कर सकते हैं, तो आपकी नजर पे डिपेंड करता है।
चीज के पीछे ये आ रहा है ग्रीक से पाइथागोरस के ज्योमेट्री एंड नंबर्स आर लाइक सिंबल्स ऑफ एसेंसेस और जबरूत। वो कितना स्ट्रॉन्ग हो गया ना कि वो इसके पीछे है, नजर नहीं आ रहा।
पर उसके अलावा अगर आप
यूनिवर्सल है, देखिए वो जितना छाड़ी है ना वो जनाब है ना।
पर अब देखो ये देखो ना स्ट्रीम आई है और स्ट्रीम के नीचे ये जो 90 डिग्री के ट्रायंगुलर फॉर्म के अंदर ये दरख्त ये पहाड़ बने।
बिल्कुल हाँ, डायगोनल है ना स्क्वायर की,
और जो स्क्वायर के अंदर एक पूरी कंप्लीट कॉम्पोजिशन है और उससे बाहर एक और
चलिए जी फिर इजाजत ले मेरे ख्याल में। बहुत ही उम्दा।
अगर कोई आपको क्वेश्चंस पूछने हैं तो आप पूछ लीजिएगा।
कुछ ना स्टूडेंट्स ने आज लीव भी थी, मुझे अनशेड्यूल्ड नॉर्मली क्लास हमारी फ्राइडे को होती है, बाय चांस एटलीस्ट 4-5 स्टूडेंट्स ने ना की, तो दो तो पीछे हैं उन्होंने माजरत नहीं की, वो भाग गए तो दूसरे कमरे में म्यूजिक प्रैक्टिस कर रहे, मगर 2-3 दोस्तों ने की, 5 हो गए, मगर it was really very nice.
So if no questions, can we exit so I can also move
बड़ा लंबा नहीं हो गया।
आज लंबा ही हो
ये अगली क्लास के खत्म हुई थी हमने।
थैंक यू मैम, काफी मजा आया और
थैंक
काफी
यू
इससे तो बात
बड़ी स्पेशल। हाँ जी
कल इजाज़त की।
गया।
Thank you, Hafiz.
अल्लाह हाफिज।